All right, so today we're going to unpack one of the most powerful ideas of the 20th century, Gandhi's whole philosophy of nonviolence. But this wasn't just some passive turn the other cheek idea. No, no. This was a full-on active strategy, a weapon really, designed to challenge the mightiest empire on earth.
So here he is, the man at the center of it all. And you got to understand, when Gandhi came back to India, the task in front of him was just colossal. We're talking about freeing hundreds of millions of people from the grip of the British Empire. Now, the usual playbook, armies, guns, war. But Gandhi? He went a completely different way.
So that brings us to the big question, right? How do you defeat an empire without firing a single shot? I mean, it sounds impossible, doesn't it? How can you possibly go up against military might, political domination with what? Nothing? But that's the thing. To Gandhi, it wasn't nothing. Not at all. He believed he was harnessing a force more powerful than any army on earth, the human soul.
So to answer that huge question, Gandhi built a whole new kind of arsenal. And I mean that. But his weapons, well, they weren't made of steel. They were made of ideas. And at the very core of this arsenal were two absolutely key principles: ahimsa and satyagraha.
Okay, so first up, ahimsa. Now, you might hear this translated as just, non-harming. Kind of passive, right? Just don't hurt people. But for Gandhi, it was so much more than that. It was profoundly active. He actually called it active love. See, the point isn't just to duck a fight. The goal is to actively engage your opponent with a moral force so strong that it can actually change their heart. Yeah, even your enemies. Right. So if ahimsa is the power source, then satyagraha, that's the engine that makes it all go. It literally translates to truth force or soul force. This is the how-to. It's the practical way you apply that active love to take on injustice. And again, the goal isn't to crush the other guy. It's, in Gandhi's own words, to win over the tyrant by love. And the way you do that is through self-suffering. And this is where it gets really radical. Think about it. Brute force, the way conflicts are usually fought, it's all about making the other side suffer until they give up. It's about destruction. Soul force is the polar opposite. It's about willingly taking the suffering onto yourself to jolt the conscience of your opponent. The aim isn't coercion, it's conversion. Man, what a revolutionary idea. Okay, so armed with these pretty radical ideas, Gandhi gets back to India. But he doesn't just, try to start a massive revolution overnight. No, he was way too strategic for that. He started small. He wanted to test his theories out in the real world, on smaller local disputes. And he didn't waste any time. In just over a year, boom, 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 he launched 3 major campaigns. In Champaran, he's defending exploited indigo farmers. Then in Ahmedabad, he's leading a strike for mill workers for fair wages. Right after that, in Kedah, he's organizing farmers against unjust taxes. You can think of each one of these as a real-world lab for satyagraha. And during that Ahmedabad strike, his own commitment really got put to the test. The workers, their resolve was starting to crumble. So what does Gandhi do? He starts a fast. See, he wasn't some leader sitting in an ivory tower. He was right there, willing to suffer with them, telling them, "We shall not allow you to die of starvation." This was so much more than a political move. It was a deeply, deeply moral act. And you know what? It worked. The results were just stunning. In every single one of these campaigns, his method proved effective. Victories were won, not with guns, not with riots, but with nonviolent resistance and pure moral pressure. He had proved his theory could work in the real world. The stage was now set for a much, much bigger fight. But, going from small local fights to a full-blown national movement, well, that brings a whole new set of challenges. And this is the moment where Gandhi's beautiful, grand theory smacks right into a messy and violent reality. So in 1919, the British passed these really repressive laws called the Rowlatt Acts. Gandhi sees this as a huge insult, a direct attack on India's self-respect. So he makes the call, a nationwide satyagraha. This was the big one. The first time he'd ever tried to get millions of people moving together under this one banner of nonviolence. The energy was absolutely electric, but it was also incredibly volatile. And the movement just exploded across the country, but not always in the way Gandhi wanted. In a small town, Chauri Chaura, a protest spiraled out of control.
It turned violent. A mob ended up murdering a group of policemen. For Gandhi, this was more than a political problem. It was a spiritual crisis. He felt like the movement had completely lost its soul. He even said later that God spoke clearly through Chauri Chaura. So instead of doubling down or pushing forward, he does something almost unthinkable. He calls the whole thing off. The entire movement, stops it dead in its tracks, and he publicly admits he failed, calling it a Himalayan miscalculation. He said he'd underrated the forces of evil and had to face the fact that the people just weren't ready for that kind of disciplined nonviolence. It was an absolutely devastating setback. So, after years of going back to the drawing board, focusing on grassroots work, Gandhi comes back onto the national stage in 1930. He hadn't given up on his principles, not at all, but he had refined his strategy. He learned a hard lesson from that miscalculation, and this time, he had a new plan, a plan that was powerful, symbolic, and just brilliantly simple.
And what was his target? Salt. Yeah, salt. Something every single person in India, rich or poor, needed to live, and something the British had a total monopoly on and taxed heavily. The plan itself was genius in its clarity. He was going to march to the sea, make his own salt, which was illegal, and basically dare the British to arrest him. And then he called on all of India to do the same, to break the law in these simple, powerful, nonviolent ways.
But this time, he had a new rule. He knew he was going to get arrested. That was part of the plan. But he made it crystal clear. The movement must not stop. This shows you how his thinking had evolved. It wasn't about passive resistance anymore. This was, as he called it, non-violence of the activist type. The struggle had to keep going. It had to escalate, whether he was in a jail cell or not.
And the Salt March? It was an absolute masterstroke. Millions of Indians joined in. The British government was completely stumped. How do you respond to that? The whole world was watching as these peaceful protesters were being met with brute force. Now, it didn't win them independence right then and there, but it was a massive moral victory. It was something that, as people said at the time, shook the very foundation of the British Empire. But of course, the story doesn't just end with a triumphant march. Gandhi's journey was never a straight line to victory. For him, nonviolence wasn't some kind of magic spell. It was a constant, lifelong experiment, an experiment that was about to be tested in the most brutal ways you can imagine.
And maybe the greatest test of all came during the partition of India in 1947. I mean, the country is finally getting its independence, but at the same time, it's being ripped apart by just horrific religious violence between Hindus and Muslims. And while all the other leaders are in the capital celebrating, where's Gandhi? He's 77 years old, and he's walking barefoot through the ravaged villages of Noakhali, a place just destroyed by riots, literally trying to walk into the heart of the hatred and stop it himself.
And this quote, it just tells you everything about his resolve. I mean, think about it. He's facing complete and utter chaos. His dream of a united, peaceful India is literally going up in flames. But his personal commitment to ahimsa, it never, ever wavered. He was willing to die for it, not as some grand leader on a stage, but just as a man, walking among the people he was trying to serve.
You know, Gandhi famously called his own life an experiment with truth. He never claimed he had all the answers. He tested his ideas, he failed, he learned from his mistakes, and he got up and tried again. And that really leaves us with a question for today, doesn't it? In our world, which is still so full of conflict and injustice, what can we learn from his experiment? What does it really take to wield a weapon of peace?